Boom, and we are live. Hello, ANCAP Radio, and welcome to another episode. Today we are joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Jayant Bhandari, good friend of mine. Have gotten to know Jayant very well over the years. He's also a repeat guest for us here on ANCAP Radio. And as you can see on today's conversation, we're going to be diving into East Asian currents and really what's going on, not only in East Asia, but I'm sure Asia at large. Jayant's Actually, I don't want to say where he's based because, we love our privacy here on NCAP Radio. But if he does want to let us know where he's coming to us from, we'll get to him here in a moment. I'm also joined by my partner in crime, New Zealand's most wanted, Dave Henderson, is in the building. We'll be getting him up on stage here in a moment. And if you can hear in the background, I'm actually on the road right now. I'm on the highway making my way down from Ontario to the beautiful state of New York. Got to take care of some business in the U.S. So this will be fun because this will be the first ANCAP Radio episode, one, that we've done on the road, and two, that we've done where I'll literally have to go through customs probably in the middle of the show. So at that point, we'll most likely kick it over to Dave and Jayant until we're through there. But gotta love it. And to our team, if you could get Dave up here, that'd be great because I would love to hear his take on going through customs while doing the show. I'm sure he'd have something funny to say. All that being said, though, welcome again. Make sure you hit the like button, the retweet button. Follow everyone up here on stage if you haven't already. Again, today we're joined by Jayant Bhandari. Jayant is an author, investor, speculator, host of a phenomenal conference, which I referenced briefly there, but he does a conference, Capitalism and Morality, which is, excuse me, in Vancouver every year. I've had the privilege of speaking there in the past. Plan on attending it and speaking at it every year that I can. He does a great job connecting a lot of like minds in our sphere. So if you haven't checked out Jayant before or his conference, again, we're going to drop a link below in a moment. Make sure you follow him as well. I know we're working on the back end to get him up here. I always love the beauty of live events. On that note, the beauty of live events, we're one step closer to having our own platform, so we don't have to depend on Twitter to get through these technical hurdles as we get shows started. ANCAPradio.com is officially live, ladies and gentlemen. ANCAPradio.com. As of today, today's the first day the website is up. So if you want to go take a look, go to ANCAPradio.com right now and tell us what you think. Tweet at us. We're tweaking it, we're fine tuning it, but we've got all the previous episodes, recordings up there. We put, as you know, if you're especially a repeat listener, months of work to get into where we're at, and in many ways we're just getting started. I know the next step, as I mentioned, is going to be our own live platform, as well as merchandise. Really excited about that. As you know, we have to have the ANCAP cigars, so I know that's one thing that we'll be pushing for. But hats, hoodies, T-shirts, and then really, to you, the audience, we'd always love to hear what you would like to rock personally with an ANCAP Radio brand, maybe even a V for Vendetta mask. I don't know. We'll look into it. As I'm going there on the V for Vendetta mask, I do want to say this as well, and I see we've got our guest with us here. And again, to our team, if you coordinate with Dave to see if we can get him up here as a co-host or just as a speaker, that would definitely be a value and a help today. But we have the Guy Fawkes Award is going to be given out in March, which we're only a few weeks away from March. Or excuse me, the February Guy Fawkes Award is going to be given before we reach March. So if you take a look through our Twitter feed, you'll see Aaron Siri won the Guy Fawkes Award for January. And really, what is the Guy Fawkes Award? It's anyone who is going to battle against the state, emerging victorious. We just want to reward people who stick up for what they believe in, stand firm. And Aaron Siri is a great example of what that would look like. But if you got any local, any neighborhood heroes, all you got to do is send an email to ancapradio@gmail.com with a little bit of context. And then if you are the winner, if the person you nominate wins, there is a $1,000 Bitcoin reward. So 800 to the person who wins, and then 200 to the person who nominated the individual. So, shoot us an email. Who do you think deserves to win the February Guy Fawkes Award? It's in your hands. All right, we're here, Jayant. I hope you can hear me. Again, I'm doing this one from the road live for the first time. So it's great to see you here. Great to have you here. If you could just unmute and let our audience know a little bit about your background and what made you an anarcho-capitalist.
Hey, thanks very much for having me again, Adam. My name is Jayant Bhandari. I have talked with you before here, and we have met personally at my seminar, which is called Capitalism and Morality in Vancouver. It's a seminar that I have run for the last 14 years in downtown Vancouver. I am an investment consultant, and I do a fair bit of writing and speaking on cultural and economic issues.
And how did you? What was the defining moment for you, Giant, when you started realizing maybe everything you've been taught is not reality?
I grew up in an unreal world. I grew up in India where I witnessed non-stop stupidities. So there was, I can't even remember when I thought that I was taught something that I believed in. Everything was unbelievable to me. And I thought there was something truly wrong about my ecology. And as a child, I think I was 6 or 7 years old, and I wanted to leave the country, and I'm very happy I did.
Yes, and since then I know you've just accomplished a lot. You've traveled all around the world. You've met some phenomenal people, many of which we're in the same circles with. Um, and also, I think this would probably help our audience too, just to build the connection. But I'll leave it up to you because I know privacy is a big thing here. Can you let our audience know where you're tuned in from today, or would you rather keep that to yourself?
I'm in San Francisco. That's my home. And yes, you correctly mentioned I travel a lot. The last time we talked, I was probably in Tokyo.
Wow. Yeah, that's right. That is right. Okay, and I see we do have my partner in crime here, our co-host, New Zealand's most wanted, Dave Henderson, is on stage, and he'll be assisting me through today's interview with you, Giant. So, Dave, I do see you're on mute right now. If you are able to unmute and just greet the audience and let us know what you're looking forward to today.
Well, good morning, Adam. It's morning for me, and good afternoon, Giant. It's great to hear you on NCAP Radio again. It was a delight to have you on last time, and we had a great response to your show. And Adam, you are traveling at the moment. You've got to go through customs, but I'm the last person you should be seeking advice from of how to expedite that process. Jayant, tell me, you are in San Francisco at the moment, in the immediate San Francisco or the broader Bay Area?
I live very close to the San Francisco airport in what is called South San Francisco.
Right.
And I have been spending a fair bit of my time in the San Francisco area since 2019. And I used to spend a lot of my time in Philadelphia before that. I was there for about 6 or 7 years.
And so the stories we hear, and it's a number of years now since I've been to San Francisco, but it sounds like an entirely unappealing place today. It used to just be a gorgeous city and a great city to visit.
Dave, the nature in that area is perhaps the best nature in terms of weather that I have ever seen. It's a beautiful place. The weather is throughout the year extremely good. And yes, we hardly ever go to downtown San Francisco because you smell poop and pee at a lot of places there. So downtown city center area of San Francisco has truly degraded. But then we don't go there much at all, really.
Right. Oh, that's terribly sad. It has historically just been a wonderful downtown area, hasn't it? From the immediate area right through to Fisherman's Wharf and all around there was a great place to visit.
Well, it was, and I haven't never experienced the greatness of San Francisco because today it's just packed with, it's not packed with, but visually you see a lot of homeless people, a lot of drug addicts, a lot of people who are just not in good shape, and it's not a pleasant feeling going around when those people are there. The Fisherman's Wharf is truly a nice place, and we go for a walk once in a while. But we stick around to the nicer areas, which is go to the beach areas and do a fair bit of walking and hiking. The hiking paths in San Francisco are fabulous. So you don't really, and I'm not really a city person anyway these days.
Well done. And so, Giant, what would you say is the prognosis for the town then? Just if we take it as a representative of a number of towns in the U.S. in particular, if not in a broader geographic area, that have just subject to mad liberal policies that have just slowly pulling them apart.
Yeah, I think there is people. Firstly, people can do whatever they want to. There is no maintenance of public space. So it seems that the police and the government does not really have the authority to control people from misbehaving in public space. If you are,
David, actually kind of sounds like an anarchist paradise, maybe.
Adam, there have to be ways, there has to be social opprobrium for bad behavior. There has to be consequences for criminal behavior, either through the government or through a body that implements sanity in public space. So that is one issue. That is one issue there in California. But also there are increasing, a lot of dangerous places, and a lot of people have been habituated into thinking that there is a reparation coming their way. So they all are waiting for $1 million checks over the next few months or the next few years, and they will wait forever. But the problem is that it has been ingrained into their mind. The victim mentality has been ingrained into the minds of so many people that they don't think they have to behave properly, and they think it's their right to get free money from taxpayers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's a really good example, and yeah, I think in many regards, I'm sure if we have any Californians tuned in right now, they would know exactly what you're talking about. But to shift gears here, and also, hello everyone, if you're just tuning in, this is ANCAP Radio. We go live every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. We're joined today by Jayant Bhandari, investor, author, speculator, and host of the Capitalism and Morality Conference. All that information below. Make sure you check out his Twitter profile and follow everyone up on here on stage as well. But when you sent over some topics to our team on what you could dive into today, I remember the very first topic caught my attention. It's the one that we've kind of titled today's conversation, but I've noticed half of it has been left out, maybe by accident. But it was something along the lines of exposing China, and I think that, and you could probably help me clarify, but I thought it was compelling because, at least in North America, there is kind of this premise that you have to watch out for China, you have to watch out for Russia. I mean, maybe I can understand the Russia one a little bit more, but there's always been this, looming Chinese threat to Americans pushed through propaganda. But from what it sounds like, it sounds like there might not really be a whole lot to be afraid of. China might be imploding. So I'd love to just kind of hear your take on that, and then also Dave's as well, just because he's in New Zealand, which proximity-wise is closer to China too.
Yeah, so Adam, the thing that I have seen is that even my friends in North America are very misinformed about East Asia. They think that whole of the East Asia is in trouble. The Western media provides an extremely negative view of East Asia. And now I am in China again in 3 days. Sorry, was I?
Okay. That's funny. I lost audio, but I'm on the road, so I was like, that must be me. And it was also kind of funny because you said something about China, and then your audio cut out.
So my audio probably cut off. I'm going to repeat what I said. What I was saying was what I have seen among people in the West, even including my friends in North America, that they have very one-sided opinion about East Asia and of China. And they have this thing about demographic collapse happening in East Asia, or about implosion of China, or absolutely crazy views about the social credit system. Now, I was in China 5 months back. I'm back in China in 3 days. And I have never experienced this so-called social credit system. There is very likely a system which marks you for not being able to take the trains and flights. But then we also in the US have this no-flight list. But I have never come across anything where there is, you get plus points if you help an old lady cross the street, or if you misbehave, you get a negative score. I have never ever seen anything like that. I have talked with young Chinese, and I've talked with a lot of Western people who live in China, and all of them actually absolutely love China because they find more freedom in China today than they do in living in the Western society. So I think there's a huge amount of confusion to do with East Asia. I absolutely love the whole East Asian countries. And when I say East Asia, I'm not including Philippines in it. I'm talking about Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, China, Singapore, and Hong Kong. And these are fabulous places, safe places. Young girls can go out at 2 o'clock in the night, and they are fabulous places to go to.
Right, and I think you might even have, plenty of friends and maybe even family in your inner circle that have connections to China. I guess I want to know what it's like also as a visitor. You kind of touched on it just there, but what is it like to truly visit there, to live there? I know that obviously the COVID whole restriction, or at least how it was painted to us in North America, was, China went a little bit over the top. So is that inaccurate as well?
COVID days are very exceptional days. You were getting beaten up in countries like Holland or Australia, or going into prison in Canada, or your accounts were getting frozen. So if you put that into perspective, it's really hard to compare like to like, because we were all stuck in one area at any point of time. So it's hard for me to compare like to like, but I followed what was happening in China from very early on when COVID struck us. The reality is that China did not do any much lockdowns until the very last days. Most of China was very free. You could move around. And then over the last few months of COVID, they went absolutely crazy. And that's when, in the bigger cities, you had, this QR code stuff and things, people going desperate and hungry. And this is what I heard from people living in those places. And that's when a lot of Chinese started thinking of leaving China. So there is this dictatorial streak, I think, in Xi Jinping. And he has a Maoist background. So he he very likely does not come from the free thought, free market philosophy of Deng Xiaoping. So maybe there's a step back for China, and it was dictatorial during COVID days, but I'm not going to say that it was necessarily worse than, let's say, Canada and Australia. What I might say is that Japan probably did not have lockdown at all during that period. It was left to people to do what they wanted to do with their lives. The only thing the government did, and which was reported as emergency measures in the Western media, which was hilarious, and what the government in Japan did was that, hey, they said, we are imposing emergency measures, and instead of closing your pub at 12 o'clock in the night, you have to close at 10 o'clock. And somehow the Western media thought this was, they had to use the word emergency and shock Western people into thinking that it was something else than what it actually was.
Super interesting. I've got, laundry list of more questions kind of populating here in my mind, but I do want to take a moment to remind everyone who's tuned in right now that we will be opening up the floor in about 10 minutes for questions and comments for Jayant in particular. If you have any for me or for Dave, happy to answer them. But if you do have any questions for Jayant, go ahead and get those prepared now. And I also want to take a moment to kick it over to Dave and just kind of hear your thoughts as well on Jayant's take.
No, I've heard similar stories out of China that the notion of the social credit system that's been hyped quite considerably is nowhere near as significant as the hype, and that I have a number of business colleagues and other friends that live in, and expats that live in China who are still as enthusiastic as ever about it, and live a relatively free life there, or certainly a life where they're not impeded in any way by the state. And
Dave, the thing is that what I have certainly seen is that when, I want to talk with young people, I want to talk with them, I want to get them to criticize Xi Jinping, and I want them to criticize CCP, and they mostly go quiet. So there's indeed, so China is not a perfect place in any way at all. But sure. China is a million times or 1,000 times better than the perception that has been given about it in the Western media. And truly, China is an extremely free place in many ways. You can talk about pretty much everything in China except to go to the public square and start challenging the existence of CCP. As long as you're not challenging Xi Jinping's existence, you are perfectly fine. You can talk about, all kinds of things. And now in North America, for example, we have this strange cancel culture. Now, I'm a brown guy, and I have been canceled in the Western society from a conference. So, there's so much respect. Habituated of it, we think that we don't suffer from it.
Yes, yeah, indeed. So the big issue, surely, then, Jayant, is the issue with Taiwan and China, which again appears to be being hyped considerably.
I want to give you guys both a heads up right now. We're pulling up to the to the customs. If I get the customs agent on the line, I'll let him know or to subscribe to ANCAP Radio. But Dave,
you must. No. There's a serious opportunity for you there, and a big bonus, Adam, if you can get a customs officer to sign up today.
All right, I'll be in touch.
Jayant, can you give us something of a view of the reality of the tensions between Taiwan and China?
Dave, when the Hong Kong protests were happening, and I'm just going to start with Hong Kong because that's something very similar to what's happening in Taiwan. I actually, for whatever reason, I was spending a lot of time in Hong Kong, and I knew I had figured out where the next protest was going to be, and I would be there ahead of other people. So I watched a lot of protests happening in Hong Kong. Right. I was sitting at the base of the Chinese flag in Hong Kong. So this is just outside the Chinese government office. This was the main flag of Chinese government. Someone climbed up that pole and pulled that flag out and desecrated it. Right. There were protests against China throughout Hong Kong. There were Aussie flags, there were British and American flags, and I was actually very surprised that despite being that it's a CCP government and it's not a Western government where free speech is relatively constrained, they actually allowed that to happen for months at a stretch, the anti-China protests. Now, if I were to advise those young people, and these were extremely polite and good young people, I was very impressed with these young people. But the problem is that by agitating China, they were creating the reasons for removal of freedoms in Hong Kong. Because
Right.
if Hong Kong were to become democratic, it would have destabilized China. So if I were on the seat of Xi Jinping, I would have said, hey, I'm not going to let this happen just because it would destabilize the rest of China. And American Washington was unnecessarily agitating China. It was probably financing or at least intellectually supporting these protests for no good reason. I mean, Hong Kong was the most free society on the planet. And I think they are doing exactly the same thing with Taiwan. It is not in the blood of DNA of East Asians to create agitation or to create arguments. Now, I go to China, and if there's an argument developing, a Chinese wants to back out and go away. Yep. They are not the kind of people that the Western media again has portrayed them to be. And if you ask a local Chinese person about their border problems with Taiwan or Hong Kong or India, they have no interest because they don't discuss political issues much. So if China is doing anything, it is mostly to ensure that as a country they stay stable. And of course, it's a second world country. It has grown very fast. Overheating has happened in the economy. So there is a political problem emerging as well, because people have been exposed to Western ways of thinking, which is, and again, Western ways of the thinking, in my view, is the ideal way of living and thinking. But then they are also exposed to wokeism, and government has to ensure that it stays stable and continues to grow in the future.
Right. And have you been when was the last time you were in Hong Kong, Jayant?
Well, I was actually in Hong Kong just before COVID. I haven't had a chance to go back to Hong Kong, but I have been to China several times after that.
Right. And you, if I recall, have a strong connection with Singapore?
Well, I used to live in Singapore. I lived in Singapore for a couple of years last decade. And I think, this is something that we should talk about. Singapore is the best run country on the planet. And Singapore is the reason why China is what it is. And Singapore is the reason why so much of the world is actually has been a free part of the planet. I seriously recommend people to read Lee Kuan Yew's autobiography. I think it's called From the Third World to the First World. It's a thick book, but it's a very easy read. And I read through that book and I thought, wow, I am an anarchist and I can't disagree with a word he wrote in that book. So, he really created what I would say, given that we are human beings and given what the other countries are like, he created the best run country on the planet. And he hugely influenced Deng Xiaoping. He influenced how China was going to be run. So so his influence was not just in Singapore, it went to China, and he talks about how Margaret Thatcher was discussing things with him, how Ronald Reagan was discussing things with him. So he was he was the best statesman of the last century. And my hope is, my wish would have been that he should have been appointed one of the top leaders of United Nations so that he could resolve this Palestinian issue and some of those issues, because he was a clear, crisp thinker.
Yeah. And it was, just remind us, Jayant, it was 1965, was it, that the British essentially packed up and moved out of Singapore?
Yeah, I think it was pretty much around that time. I think the British finally left in 1971. I can be wrong about the figures, but he convinced the Aussies to stay in Singapore. So he was very open-minded. He wanted the Western armies to actually be stationed in Singapore. He actually sort of begged them to be in Singapore. He wanted Western companies to come and invest in Singapore. So, and he wanted the British to stay on, but the British would left despite his asking them not to leave.
And much like Hong Kong, Giant, it's a little rock sitting, in the with no resources at all, very limited landmass, and what about 6 million people or something, 5 to 6 million people today. And it's turned that little rock into this ridiculously prosperous nation.
It's the second richest country on the planet today. And, as you rightly mentioned, while I lived there early part of last decade, I still go there a few times a year. I can walk into any small takeout place in Singapore, and I'm going to get good, freshly cooked food. I hardly ever have a reason to complain about anything. People are polite because they are taught to be polite. Now, what they're thinking inside their mind is none of my business, and I don't care about it. But the people,
Sure.
it has, this is the good thing about East Asia, Dave, and particularly about Singapore. They have copied the best aspects of the Western society. The
Right.
classical Western society. So it is actually, East Asia is nothing but preserved part of the Western society today. Now they don't have the underpinning philosophy and the free thinking that exists in the West even today, but they have all the buildings and institutions and that the West has. Let me quote you an example, Dave. A few years back, I bought a plane ticket using my credit card in Singapore when, I still have my credit card in Singapore, despite that I no longer live there. But, I used that credit card and the flight did not got canceled during COVID times. And bank also declined the money.
Yeah.
So I went through to the financial authority in Singapore. The woman at the financial authority kept on talking with me for the rest of the day, and within 3 days I had the money in my account. So that is how efficiently the government runs in Singapore.
Right. And I mean, isn't it, and of course the history of Hong Kong, certainly in the 20th century, aren't they just the most beautiful examples for young people, for students anywhere, of how you create wealth, how you unleash prosperity and lift people out of their poverty? And they are venues that or locations that no one cared about from a geopolitical sense. No one was very interested in, and just being left alone with free markets, they just prospered and went nuts and have created standards of living and wealth that was inconceivable 40 or 50 years ago.
I couldn't agree more with that, Dave. And this is, I am, whenever I go to Singapore, despite that I have become very habituated of it, and despite that you start finding bad things about a country once you have lived there or once you have been there too often, I actually am in awe of Singapore every time I'm there, because they have just created such a good structure. The roads are great. The system works everywhere, despite that the government influence on companies and people is very limited. Now, I know that there's this erroneous belief in the Western society that Singapore is some kind of police state. And maybe it is. Maybe there are a lot of plain clothed policemen walking around in Singapore. I don't know about it. But I have never, ever been stopped. I have never been asked any questions. and I can walk with my beer in my hand and walk around on the street, and there's no problem. No one is going to hassle me. No one is going to accost me. As long as you don't do drugs, if you can pretty much do what you want to do in Singapore.
Yeah. No, isn't that delightful? Now, Jayant, I'm always technically lost when I don't have Adam supporting me here, but I'm keen to open this up.
Hey,
Adam's back. There you go.
I didn't want to interrupt you guys. You were vibing.
I was assuming you'd got arrested or something for giving the customs guy some lip, Adam, but
especially follow Jayant as well. I'm going to be at my destination in a moment, which is a coffee shop, and then from there on my way to do what I got to do.
So, Adam? We seem to have lost our connection with Adam. He's coming back. Jayant, do I still have you there?
All right, I'm not sure what happened there, or if anyone can hear me right now. That was funny. Lost connection coming in.
You're there. We got you.
Oh, we're back. Okay, awesome. I see we have our first caller, so that's the priority. Want to make sure we get to our first caller. Want to let everyone else know as well. Just keep raise your hand. You tap the request button to get up here, and keep it to one question or comment. So I see we got to get Jayant back on stage here now as well. So I see our team is hustling to help with that. And then Suleiman, we're going to bring you up here to ask you a question momentarily. I'm not sure where I cut out there, but
Here we go.
almost at my
Can you hear me?
My destination as well, so we should have some stability here. All right, Suleiman, good to see you. Welcome to ANCAP Radio. What's your question or your comment for
Salutations. My question, and it's a common one regarding the East Asia region. I'm very impressed by it. I visited China, I visited Japan, and I'm half Indian, half Pakistani, and comparatively, these countries
awesome.
are.
Hey, Suleiman, I just remembered. I forgot to ask you where are you calling in from?
I'm from the United States of America, but ethnically, I'm half Indian, half Pakistani.
I'm sorry. I mean, where in the U.S. are you calling in from?
San Diego, California.
Awesome. All right, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, and one thing that happens in industrialized societies is that women join the labor force, which is good because it increases, the amount of laborers and the real GDP per capita. But now the birth rates in all these first world East Asian countries like China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, Singapore are very low, and the overall consensus is that they need to start importing immigrants from third world countries. And I think it's a slippery slope because what will happen is if these immigrants come, the overall quality of these societies would decline. So I was just interested in maybe what Mr. Bhandari or you guys had to say about that. Fact that Korean politicians or Japanese politicians seem pretty keen on immigrating lots of immigrants from the third world. I think it would destroy these otherwise very safe, civil, homogeneous societies.
Well, so Suleiman, that's a very
You cut out Mr. Bhandari. I cannot hear you currently.
Yeah, I know he had a few moments there, cutting in and out as well. I mean, Dave, I know you could speak probably pretty strongly to this as well. I'd like to hear your take.
Well, I'm not going to be as capable at it as Jayant is. There is a fundamental issue, and it's obviously one that's going to be a problem for a long time to come. But I mean, America was built on immigration, but it was built on immigration where people were turning up thirsty for opportunity, thirsty for work. Whereas most immigration today is people fleeing socialist hellholes, and seeing the opportunity in the West, where they can get sort of quite a considerable free carriage in their life. None of that is appropriate, and none of it is ever going to attract the right sort of immigrant. But Giant's back here now; he'll have a better take than me on this.
Yeah, so Dave, Suleiman asked a very valid question. One great thing about East Asian countries is that they don't accept refugees and immigrants. If you swim over to Singapore to get refugee status, they will very likely punish you very badly, so much so that you never return back. And they will put a lifetime ban on you from ever returning back to Singapore. And that is pretty much true with all these countries. No one dares to cross over into these countries. They want to keep themselves homogeneous because they fully understand that bringing in multiculturalism is going to be disastrous for them. Now, I go to Hokkaido and I see a lot of illegal Chinese workers working in the seafood industry. Now, Japanese government allows that to happen with a full understanding that these people will have to leave when the time is up. So they have found this sweet spot where they allow people to come in, but they don't let these people stay there forever. You might have been living in some of these countries for 2 or 3 generations, but you might never become their citizens. And that is how East Asia has worked, and that's how I think a lot of the world should work. And Suleiman was 100% correct. You bring in wrong kind of people, you will destroy your society.
Thank you, Jayant. Thank you, Suleiman, as well. I think we had someone else call it in there. I'm not sure where they went, but yeah, if you have a question or a comment, all you got to do is tap the request button at the bottom, and we'll bring you up here. So, thank you. And Dave, go ahead. You had something to say
there. No, I was just agreeing fundamentally with the proposition. Which Jayant articulated perfectly, and it's again, it's another great lesson that should be learned from those countries is their determination to respect that there is some cultural imperatives that drive their success and their peaceful existence, and it's just a matter of how to respect those. I mean, the problem is, Jayant, is that, of course, from an anarcho-capitalist position, the notion of borders, the notion of customs, which Adam's just been through, and so forth, is ridiculous. But the problem is, it's in the meantime, when you've got a very, very strong social welfare system that people can readily tap into, they become attractive destinations for all sorts of people. And with that, if you are going to hold a society together, you do need strong borders, sadly.
Yes, Dave. And you go to some of these countries and you see 70, 75-year-old people working, because the policy of East Asia pretty much is that if you don't have money and if you don't work, you will go hungry. They might give you some very basic money to survive on if you are completely broke, but you should not expect too much money from these governments. They might give you $50 or $100 a month if you really, really need it, but they won't give you too much. So they don't have the welfare system anyway, and they don't let those people who want to exploit their system come and live in their countries. And I think that's a great thing. And I completely agree with you. From an anarcho-capitalist perspective, there should probably be no borders. There should probably be no governments. But the reality is that we live in the real life. And as the world stands today, It's all based on what is relatively better. And East Asian countries, in many ways, have done relatively a much better job than the governments elsewhere in the world have done over the last 50 to 70 years.
And we do have another caller right now as well, Michael Roberts, who's a good friend of ours, repeat listener, also been a guest on ANCAP Radio before as well. So, Michael, go ahead with your question for Jayant. You're on mute right now, by the way, Michael.
Hi, Adam. Hi, Jayant. How are you?
Very well,
Hey,
Michael.
good. Let us know where you're calling in from as well.
Calling from Central Florida. I've got a question about Japan, and my information is rather dated because I lived there in the late 90s. But at that time, and I think going back to the 80s, Japan had a shortage of workers and needed some form of immigration, and they decided to let Japanese descendants or people of Japanese descent who had left Japan about 100 years prior and immigrated to Brazil. So they let their basically their grandchildren or great grandchildren come back and get permanent work visas. So they prefer, in other words, they offered preference to people of Japanese blood, Japanese descent. Have they sufficiently resisted the sort of globalist push or globalist type ideas in order to maybe use a program like that again, or does something like that still exist to your knowledge? At that time, there were communities of people that were, they looked at, a gradient of all the way Japanese, partly Japanese, but they had grown up in Brazil, or maybe they were third, fourth generation Brazilian, and spoke Portuguese. But it was, I think it was maybe a better transition, for everybody in terms of, as opposed to, say, opening the borders to random people. Thanks.
Well, Michael, I don't have a response to that specific issue, but all I can say is that so far, East Asian countries have mostly resisted the progressive, liberal, woke ideology. You can't really do a pride parade, I think, in most of these countries. You can't show off your genitals in public in front of 5-year-old kids. So that is not acceptable here. There's social opprobrium, but also I think you will get into legal trouble if you try doing anything like that. So they have avoided a lot of globalist influence. My guess is that the reason why the mainstream media gives a bad name to East Asia is because they want to manipulate and blackmail East Asia into accepting the globalist agenda. So far they have done a fabulous job, except that I think the young people in Hong Kong were clearly influenced by the globalist agenda. Despite that, I actually would have wanted Hong Kong to be a completely free, independent country. But they were influenced by it. They did not think through what was going to come if they protest too much against China. So I think they have done a very, very good job in this region, in East Asian region.
Thanks. Thanks, Jayant.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And Michael, actually, haven't you been to a few of Jayant's conferences before?
Definitely, and I highly recommend it for anybody listening. This is one of the best experiences. Giants Conference has a really interesting variety of speakers. Every year, I went from around 2010 until just prior to the COVID operation when the border was closed. So I went basically almost every year for 10 years. Great conference.
Thank you. We got links and information down in the thread below, and we are going to bring it down for a landing here in about 10 minutes. So if you did have a question for Jayant, Dave, myself, now would be the time to just tap that the request button at the bottom of the screen there, and we'll get you up here. But yeah, Giant, I guess as we get ready to close this thing down, we have not really zoned in too much on the ANCAP philosophy, and I know that's one thing that Dave and I always like to touch on when we can. I mean, for you, there's a lot of different ways to put anarcho-capitalism into a sentence, two sentences, whatever. But what would the definition of ANCAP, anarcho-capitalism, libertarianism, like, what is that to you?
Well, I want to be able to live as free a life as I want to without any external influences, manipulation, or control. And I look for places, I want to live in places where I can be what I am and express myself. And I find the United States as one of the best places to live in because it gives me a huge amount of freedom of speech. I feel, depending on how I structure my life, I can be very safe. So that's what NCAP means to me. Ideally, I want no government, I want no borders, but at the same time, that will come only if the society is morally awake enough and more honorable enough that individuals can do the job of self-governing and creating a self-regulatory atmosphere where criminals don't go unpunished just because there's no external authority overseeing your life.
Indeed, Giant. It's the fundamental issue is that you can't have liberty without first having responsibility, and responsibility is something that there is a dire shortage of, and people.
Yeah, and that's why, Dave, I call my seminar Capitalism and Morality, because moral values is a very important part of having the free market. Free market to a lot of people means that you can pretty much do whatever you want to. No, that's not what it means. It just means that you can't do fraud. You shouldn't be stealing. You shouldn't be running tyrannies on other people if you can suppress them. There must be a moral code driving individuals in that society, and that is the only way a society can become a free society. As the Western societies have given up on some of the moral concepts that they have become less and less free because the government that provides fissures, leeways for psychopaths to rise in power and start running our lives.
And indeed, and those psychopaths who do lust for power, of course, take complete advantage of the fact that lots of people choose to abandon their obligations, their responsibilities, if you like, to themselves and their family, and so the voters lust for someone who will give them something for nothing, something free. I was recalling as you were talking about the refugees turning up in some of these Asian countries and the treatment they get. There's 250,000 people a year crossing the Mexican-US border at the moment who are mostly given cell phones and debit cards. I haven't heard the reports of how much is on the debit card, but I assume it's way more than the $50 or $100 that you were talking about.
Yeah, and Dave, one of the best way to improve a society is to let a few people go hungry. I have spent a lot of time hungry and desperate for money. And when you have that situation, that is actually the most educational experience of your life. It converts you into an entrepreneur. So it is actually a good thing to let people go hungry once in a while rather than give them money every time they need it.
Isn't that so true?
Very well said. We do have Suleiman is back with another question before we wind down here. So yeah, you had a great question before. You're back on the mic, the man from San Diego.
Sure thing. I like that response by Mr. Bhandari as well. I think a good sense of morality religiously and culturally is basically a prerequisite for a successful society in terms of capitalism. Because, like, if you think about it, capitalism as an institution requires people to have trust in each other. There's very few successful low trust capitalist countries. So I agree with Mr. Bhandari. My question for you guys is that, one of the big problems in Japan is the aging demographics. I believe 30% of the country is over the age of 70. And I think there's around 1.5 million small business owners over the age of 80 that have no heirs, like no successors lined up to take over the businesses. So, like, in this regard, especially for Japan, Mr. Bhandari, are you confident enough that they could maybe move their manufacturing more into like a automated AI robotic type system that's not reliant on like manual labor? Or do you think that's not likely to happen, and in turn their like economies might shrink as a result of the, declining demographics?
So Suleiman, I have driven around Japan. I have been to villages, smaller places, and a lot of villages have got completely emptied out. You see completely empty villages or with a few houses occupied by very old people. So the aging process in Japan is real. But what is important to remember is that the aging process is a problem not just in Japan, it is a problem in the whole of the developed world. We are in the Western world fooling ourselves by thinking that by kicking the can down the road while we destroy our society and culture and bring in a lot of people from outside who are not really productive members, we can deal with this demographic problem. So at least East Asia is not trying to kick the can down the road, and it is not trying to fool itself into thinking that just because it brought in a lot of unproductive people, its demographic problem has been resolved. So that's one thing about East Asia. The second thing is that, yeah, this is actually an issue. The fertility rate of Western society, the developed world, has actually continued to fall everywhere. My guess so far is that Japan has been able to take care of falling young people either through temporary workers from outside. So there are a lot of Filipinos now working in hospitals, for example. So they bring in people from outside. The seafood industry people from China come in. So you can deal with all these things by proper planning rather than by just opening up your gate to whosoever wants to enter your country.
That makes a lot of sense, and that was a good response. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Suleiman. Great questions today as well. Hope to see you around on NCAP Radio more in the future. Appreciate your feedback and your input. And Jayant, Dave, here we are. Going to wind it down once and for all, but I want to remind everyone, make sure you hit the like button, the retweet button here, follow everyone up on stage if you haven't already. And to close it out, starting with Jayant, and then we'll go to Dave. Jayant, what would you say is one of your key takeaways, maybe one or two key takeaways from today's conversation?
This is an interesting thing. East Asia is something that I went to East Asia thinking it was a boring, dictatorial, bad place. And I have, every time I have gone there, I have, I've been in awe of East Asia. And, a few days back, a friend of mine asked me if if I were to be used by Singapore or China to offer them my suggestions on how they could improve themselves, what would I do? And I said, hey, I can pretty much advise a lot of countries on the planet, but not to East Asian countries, because they have done such a fabulous job.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. Sorry, Dave, and yeah, I don't know if you were going to continue on that.
No, I agree. It was. This has been a great reminder for me from Jayant that, one thing we often talk about on this show is how one lives an ANCAP life on a planet that is determined to be collectivist, and it is a good reminder that there are places. We talked about Singapore, we talked about Hong Kong. There's others where one could happily live a great life, a great existence, and reasonably free, and be left alone. and it's worth looking at those places. Thank you, Jayant.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Giant. Thank you, everyone, as well, who joined us here today, investing your most valuable resource with us, your time. We hope you learned something today. Again, be sure to spread the message of anarcho-capitalism. Let everyone know ANCAP Radio is live, the website, ancapradio.com. Of course, we're live right now, too. But check out our website, ancapradio.com. We'll see you back here next week at the same time with Mikkel Thorup of expatmoney.io. Looking forward to it. Thank you again. See you next week.
Great. Thank you very much.